Well, if you didn't know that you're in the right place today yet, now you know without a doubt. You're in the right place today. God is here. God is here. God is here. It's my privilege to be here with you today, and I want him to come back and play some more. I don't know. But wow, I'm so glad to see all of you. What an amazing time we've already shared today. And we thank Pam again for that incredible testimony of God in her life. It's so good, so good. God is moving, he is alive. He is alive. Woo, wow. Well, last week, I told you that we were gonna be celebrating my daughter Millie's 7th birthday. We did, it was last Monday. It was her birthday. Well, let me tell you about how that went, okay? Let me tell you. There was a book fair at Millie's school on Monday, so Gwen and I decided to go in and buy her whatever she wanted at the book fair as part of her birthday present. Now, I was a kid once, and my parents, when I would go to the book fair, they would threaten me. They would say, I'm gonna give you money, but if you come back with a whole bunch of toys, I'm never giving you money again. You go to the book fair, you buy some books, So we go with Millie to the book fair, and what do I buy Millie at the book fair? A puppy love poster, puppy love, whatever. A decoder pen, so she writes notes on her friend's hands and then they can see it with the light on the other end, and some cupcake pencil sharpener. We did buy her a few books too, but that's what we bought her. So it's her birthday, we buy her whatever she wants at the book fair, we bring her class cupcakes, we come home, we plan to go to Olive Garden with her. It's her favorite, okay, I don't know, favorite. And then we're gonna go to GameStop to buy her a new Nintendo Switch game. I mean, what a birthday for this girl. And then I didn't even know this, but Gwen bought her some stuff from Amazon. She got her some books, and she got her this It's a Small World board game. We're Disney people, so she got her this It's a Small World board game. So, what proceeded from there was a beautiful scene. She laid at our feet and called us blessed, Thank you, Mom and Dad, for making my birthday the best day ever. I don't deserve but one gift. And here you've lavished a buffet of goodness in front of me. No, she didn't say that. If you're a parent, you know what I'm saying, right? She did not say that at all. I was thinking before I shared this with you, I was a teacher's kid. My parents were public school teachers, and I grew up in the same school that my parents worked at. So I couldn't ever get away with anything in school because my parents would find out. Well, it's definitely gotta be worse for Millie and Taya and baby boy show eventually, It's gotta be worse because it's the pastor's kid, and all of their sin and struggle make it right up to the pulpit. Because you can't get a better illustration than looking at the sin in your own children. You know what I'm saying? So sorry to them. But anyway, in that moment when Millie was being a bit of a brat on her birthday, I was conflicted. Part of me just said, you know what? It's her birthday. Just let it go. Just move on. Just celebrate it. The other part of me said, I don't care. It's time to rain down some righteous judgment on this unrepentant sinner and make her pay for this. So I'm conflicted. I was torn. Love or justice? Which one do I go to? Well, as the attempts at love continued to fail and were rejected, let's just say I went down the path of justice for a good bit, okay? But after justice did reign toward my daughter for a few moments, I went up to her room and I explained why she was in trouble. And then I kissed her and I said, okay, now we're gonna go celebrate your birthday. And we went to Olive Garden. She even got her game at the GameStop. Okay, so there was love. And if you have kids, had kids, you know that there's a conflict between love and justice, right? You always have this conflict of love or justice toward them. Because it seems that love and justice, they're opposed to each other. And you feel this conflict of which route do I go down? That's kind of how I felt with Millie, which one should I show? Well, as we get to 2 Samuel 13 and 14 today, we'll watch David face this same conflict with his children. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them to 2 Samuel chapter 13. 2 Samuel chapter 13. This is part 18 of our series on the life of David. And for part 18 today, the message title is The One True Kiss. The One True Kiss. Gwen's down there smiling at me. I know all the one true kiss, she said. She said. You know, the first time that we kissed the wedding day. Why's everybody laughing? I'm just kidding. She couldn't help herself. We kissed a lot of times before our wedding day. Lots of times. Anyway, I'm not talking about that kind of kiss, okay? You'll see. I'm not talking about that kind of kiss. But it's called the one true kiss. You'll see what I mean later on. You'll see. Now, before we get into this, chapter 13, I want to remind you of a verse that was spoken by the prophet Nathan to David after his sin with Bathsheba. Wilson preached on this a few weeks ago. This is part of the consequences of David's sin with Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 12, verse 9. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and have taken his wife to be your wife and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. The sword shall never depart from your house, he says. And this phrase will define the final period of David's role in life. This foretold strife in David's life, it begins basically right away in 2 Samuel chapter 13. Now, we're not going to read the whole narrative, but let me summarize for you what happens in this chapter. So David's son Amnon develops a twisted infatuation with his stepsister Tamar. Verse 2 says that he was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister, for she was a virgin and it seemed impossible to do anything to her. Well, he becomes so filled with this twisted desire that he devises a scheme to get her alone. And when he gets her alone, he actually rapes her. Then after he does this, look what he says. He, Amnon, called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now, if you go back to the original Hebrew, this is interesting. The word woman isn't even present. In other words, Amnon literally says, "Put this out of my presence. Put this out of my presence." Amnon doesn't view her anymore as a person. Probably never really did, but viewed her as an object to be had. Sound familiar? Where did we hear this before? Look at 2 Samuel chapter 11. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, remember I preached about this, one said, "No, it's not just a woman, she's a person. Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David didn't view Bathsheba as a person, but as an object to be had. And now Amnon doesn't view Tamar as a person, but as an object to be had. Sound familiar? Let's keep going. After Amnon rapes her, another one of David's sons named Absalom finds out what has happened. He decides to take matters into his own hands and devises a scheme to have Amnon killed. Then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him, do not fear, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Sound familiar? Let's go back again to 2 Samuel chapter 11. And David invited Uriah, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but did not go down to his house. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him that he may be struck down and die. Scheme, have somebody killed. Like father, like sons. What transpires in 2 Samuel 13 is a very real reminder to us that the patterns of depravity and patterns of sin run from one generation to the next. In other words, the sins of one generation become a curse on the next generation. That's what the Bible says. Look at Exodus chapter 20. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? Listen to this quote. The sins of the fathers are punished in the children through becoming the children's own sins. When father sins are visited on the children, it is because the children have become sinners like the fathers. The father's sins are the children's sins. That is how the sins of one generation become a curse on the next generation. It's called generational sin. Look, regardless of how great or how bad your parents were, still are, whatever, they're still sinners. They're still sinners. Sorry, Mom, sorry, Dad. They're still sinners. And so if you aren't aware of the ways in which they displayed sin to you, you will repeat the same sins in your life. That is exactly what is happening with Amnon and Absalom. Did you see it so clearly? We're reading what they're doing and we're just saying, sound familiar? Sound familiar? I've heard this before, sound familiar? The sins of the fathers are punished in the children through becoming the sins of the children. Sound familiar? It's generational sin. And please do not bury your heads in the sand today. Generational sins and curses still exist. There are generational sins of addiction, of abuse, of unhealthy relationships, of gossip, insecurity, laziness, emotional neglect, entitlement. The list goes on. And we all face them. We all face generational sin. But I have good news for you today. You serve a curse-breaking, chain-shattering, all-restoring, life-breathing God. No stronghold is too strong for our God. Exodus 25, it may say, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. But there's an Exodus 20, verse 6. It says, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You know, there's reason for you to look at the generational sins that you've seen in your life. And what you do when you see them is the same thing you do when you see sin in your own life. Look at Leviticus chapter 26. But if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers in their treachery that they committed against me, if then their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham. Just confess your iniquity. Even confess the iniquity of your fathers. Confess the generational curse that you've identified in your life. And if you confess it, you'll no longer be defined by the curse, but by the covenant of God. That is my new definition, not by the curse, but by the covenant. You will no longer be defined or enslaved by the sound familiar. No more sound familiar pattern of sin in your family. It stops with you. You're the unfamiliar. God is going to use you to bring the unfamiliar into the same familiar pattern of sin that you've been cursed with. You are the unfamiliar today. The old has gone, the new has come. The curse is broken in Jesus' name. It's unfamiliar now. Are you thankful for a God who can break any chain? And he's gonna use you to do it. You've got the power to break those chains through Jesus' power. You're unfamiliar. Man, I want to declare that over your life today. You are unfamiliar to the same pattern that has held you down for too long. You are unfamiliar to it. Unfamiliar. I could go on that all morning, but we'll move on. Let's go back to the story. Unfortunately, instead of confessing generational sins and curses and breaking them, being the unfamiliar, Amnon and Absalom ride them directly to their destruction. Now, Amnon is dead, and Absalom is a murderer. After such a tumultuous string of events, before we move on, I think we should ask ourselves, where has David been in all of this? Where has he been? Well, he has been present, as we'll see. I'll show you, he's been present, but he's failed to lead. He may have been present, but his passivity, not his leadership, but his passivity is what has marked how he's dealt with these situations. Look at this passivity throughout this chapter. Let me show you. First off, verse 7 tells us that David was the one who sends Tamar to Amnon's house. Clearly, that means he doesn't know what's going on in his own family. The context shows that the whole Amnon-Tamar thing wasn't a deep secret. It was known by others in his family. Look at what Absalom said in verse 20. He said, and her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon your brother been with you? Absalom knew what has happened immediately when he hears of this. Meaning Amnon's thing with Tamar wasn't really a secret. Absalom knew what was going on. And yet David still sends Tamar to Amnon's house. He's passive. He doesn't know what's going on in his own family. Then look at verse 21. This is his reaction to hearing what has happened. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. He may have been angry, but notice he does nothing to address the situation. Good, he's angry, but what did he actually do about it? Nothing. We don't see. He's the father of these children and the king of the nation, and yet he does nothing. One commentator says this, was this all? Was no punishment found for Amnon? Was he allowed to remain in the palace, the oldest son of the king, with nothing to mark his father's displeasure? Nothing to neutralize his influence with the other royal children? Nothing to prevent the repetition of wickedness? We cannot but be indignant at the inactivity of David. Then, as Absalom is seeking to kill his brother Amnon, look at what David does. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. David does nothing to investigate what is actually going on here. But instead he just gives in to Absalom. Even after Absalom has pressed him, he just gives in to him. And from there, Absalom is able to execute his plan and have Amnon killed. All throughout the chapter, David is passive while his family and his household descend into utter chaos. And if you notice in the narrative, this actually goes on for years. It indicates this isn't just over a short period of time, this is over years. He's passive and he's inactive. No initiative, no leading, just passive. You know, are y'all ready for some real talk? Real talk with PT, we'll call it. I like it. Real talk with PT. You probably notice that I don't talk a whole lot about what's going on in the world. Don't. That's intentional. I've reserved this pulpit for preaching the good news. Good news. Nothing but Jesus. It's good news. If y'all want to go get depressed, watch that other news, okay? But you're not going to hear depression coming from here. The enemy has been defeated. This is good news coming from here. Good news. Nothing but Jesus. It's the only cure anyway. But since we are called to be ambassadors to this broken world that we live in, sometimes I do have to remind you about this broken world and messed up world that we live in, and we do call home for now. Recently, there's been a lot of talk in our world about gender identity, gender roles, gender rights, what we are allowing to be taught about gender, what defines a man, what defines a woman. Now I got everybody's attention. Listen, all that is simply an attack straight from the pit of hell to confuse what the God-ordained, God purpose of human beings is. That's all it is. That's all it is. The devil is the master of confusion, and that's exactly what he's doing. It's that simple, sowing confusion. Now, if you want me to go from here and hammer out some politics, I'm not going to do that. My battle isn't against flesh and blood. It's not against people. It's not against politicians. It's not against Disney World. My battle is against the cosmic powers of this present darkness and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. That's the battle I'm interested in fighting, because that's the real battle. Don't be fooled. So I need to remind you today, here's the point. The devil didn't just recently start attacking gender roles. He's been attacking them for a long time, and one of his primary attacks is convincing a man that it's okay to be passive. It's not. Maybe we should be more concerned about those attacks that the devil has raged against the family and against men for many years. And this attack, listen, it's just as devastating as anything you see on the news. Don't let anything convince you otherwise. Where has David been in all of this? Men, I know there's a lot in the news, but this passage should shift your attention to your gender role at home. Don't confuse it. It's not to be passive. It's not. It's not to be apathetic. It's not to be inactive. It's not to be absent. Men, our role is to lead. Lead, lead, lead. Where has David been in all of this? Men, don't let your families ask, where has he been in all of this? I want to give a shout out to Mike O'Neill and our men's ministry for teaching men all about this. It's not to be passive, it's to be active. It's to lead. David's passivity has led to this spiral, and now his daughter is violated, Amnon is dead, and Absalom is a murderer. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. So now David is dealing with this fallout of the situation. And there's debate as to what this means, that the king's heart went out to Absalom. What does it mean? Is it positive or is it negative? Did it go out in love or did it go out in anger? How did his heart go out? It's not clear. I studied the original Hebrew. Some translators say one thing, some say another. We're not sure what it means that it went out to Absalom. And I think that's exactly the point. I think it's both. As we get to chapter 14, after all this has transpired, I think the point here is that David is torn. David's torn. Love or justice? I think the context supports this view. Remember, David has done nothing, right? He's done nothing. He's failed to take a stand the entire time. If his heart was going out positively for Absalom, why didn't he just bring him back, But instead, David just left him in Geshur for 3 years. On the other hand, if his heart went out negatively against Absalom, well, then why didn't he just have him punished and killed for what he's done? See what I'm saying? David is torn. Do I love or justice? What do I do? I mean, what would you have done? Ask yourself that question. What would you have done? Before you say, well, I always execute the law justly. Okay. Remember, Absalom was still David's son. It's his son. Executing the law justly means you sentence him to die. It's not just that easy. Love or justice? Do you execute the law justly and make your daughter stay in a room on her birthday for being a brat? Or do you look past it and just love her, even though that might not be the best thing for her? Okay, what is it? Love or justice? Love or justice? David is torn. So since this is clearly getting nowhere, Joab, the commander of David's army, he comes up with this plan to just have David bring Absalom back. He's just tired of it. Now, Joab wasn't like a fan of Absalom, okay? He's the one that will actually kill him, spoiler alert, all right? But we're not sure why he wanted to bring him back. It's probably just because this whole situation wasn't good. You've got a royal prince in another nation. David's probably a mess about it. Joab's just like, I need to just move this on. So Joab, his plan, he brings in this wise woman from Tekoa. He plans it so it would look like she was coming to seek David's wisdom about this issue, okay? And so when she comes, she tells this story that's eerily similar to what David is going through at the moment, okay? And it actually says in the text that Joab put words in her mouth, okay? So it was just this made up story. And at the end of this story, she says this. She tells David this, verse 14, we must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. It's an obvious appeal to bring Absalom back. That's what she's trying to do. So after he hears her random story, that wasn't so random, David figures out what's going on, and he says, has Joab put you up to this? And she says, yeah, it was Joab, you got me, okay. Now, it's not clear why this changed David's mind or kind of loosened the logjam as to this standoff, but it does, it made David act. And so after this exchange, look what happens in verse 21. Then the king said to Joab, behold, now I grant this, go, bring back the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. David brings Absalom back, but notice, even though David brings him back, he's still torn, right? You can come back, love, but you can't come in my presence, justice. David's still torn. Verse 28. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And he sent a second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servants, he deals with it himself. See, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go set it on fire. What a nice guy. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? That's not what I would be saying if he set my field on fire, I'll tell you that. Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent word to you. Come here that I may send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. That's how the story ends. Once I got to the end of this chapter and read about this kiss, I kept trying to answer the question, well, what's the point? What's the conclusion here? We've seen this theme that David is torn, right? Love or justice? Well, which one prevailed? What's the conclusion? We may assume that love prevailed because David kissed him, but I don't think that's the case. What did the kiss mean? Right? Nothing. It was empty. There may have been a kiss, but there was no real reconciliation here. So what's the conclusion? What's the point? I wrestled with this a lot. What do I tell? What's the point of this story? And here's the conclusion I have for you. The point is, there is no point. You paid big bucks for that one today, didn't you? My conclusion is, there is no conclusion. Love or justice? Neither. David didn't show Absalom either, did he? Neither one. He couldn't reconcile love and justice. Even in this kiss, he was still torn. And that is the point of this fruitless ending. The point is, there is no point. The point is that David couldn't reconcile love and justice. The point is, there is no point, because this story is supposed to point you to the only thing that could ever reconcile love and justice. And you know what that thing is, don't you? It's the cross of Jesus Christ. That is the only place where perfect love met perfect justice, and both were completely satisfied and completely reconciled together. David felt conflicted toward Absalom, love or justice. But the message I have for you today is that God is not conflicted at all between showing either to you, because he showed you both. He showed you perfect love, and he showed you perfect justice. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Because of the cross, because of Jesus, his love towards you is perfect, and his justice towards you is also perfect. The justice towards you has been satisfied. It's just as if you've never sinned, and just as if you've always obeyed. Someone needs to hear this. There is no conflict in how God views you. None. He doesn't struggle with showing you love because you deserve justice. You do deserve justice, but Jesus stood in your place and took it for you. The judgment for you has been satisfied. So now there is no condemnation. There is no condemnation for you in Christ Jesus. The image of the one true kiss, it comes from this old hymn called "Here Is Love." Listen to the words from verse 2. On the Mount of Crucifixion, fountains opened deep and wide. Through the floodgates of God's mercy flowed a vast and gracious tide. Grace and love like mighty rivers poured incessant from above. And listen to this line. Heaven's peace and perfect justice kissed a guilty world in love. David's kiss to Absalom had no point, and that's the point. It was pointing to the one true kiss, when heaven's peace and perfect justice kissed a guilty world in love. See, in Jesus, through the cross, love and justice are reconciled completely. And his love towards you is perfect, and his justice towards you is also perfect. It has been satisfied. There's no conflict with how he views you today. None. Perfect love and perfect justice has been satisfied. And there is no condemnation. None. You are loved, you are pardoned, and you are reconciled. It is finished. There's no conflict with how he views you today. You're his child, and he kisses you with all the love that he has for you. There's no condemnation for you in Christ Jesus. For thanks be to God, we are the recipients of the one true kiss.